You know that moment when you realize the person you'd die for wouldn't even inconvenience themselves to save your life? That moment when the scales fall from your eyes and you see 20 years of manipulation disguised as love? Well, I'm about to tell you about my moment. And trust me, by the end of this story, you'll understand why my daughter and her entire family went from feeling entitled to everything I had to begging for my forgiveness in less than 24 hours. But before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. My name is Norma Jackson, and I'm 73 years old. For most of my life, I thought being a good mother meant saying yes to everything, giving until it hurt, and never, ever disappointing my children. I thought love meant sacrifice without question, support without boundaries, and forgiveness without accountability. I was wrong about all of it, and it took one Thanksgiving disaster to teach me the most important lesson of my life. The phone rang on a Tuesday morning in early November, piercing through the quiet of my small kitchen where I sat with my cup of coffee and yesterday's crossword puzzle. The caller ID showed Sarah's name, and my heart did that little flutter. It always did when one of my children called. At 73, you learn to treasure these moments of connection, especially when they come from your busy adult children who have lives that seem to spin faster than you can keep up with. "Mom, hi! I hope I'm not calling too early." Sarah's voice came through bright and cheerful, though I detected that undertone of urgency that usually meant she needed something. It was 8:30 in the morning, which was early for Sarah, considering she rarely surfaced before 10 on her days off from her high-powered marketing job. "Never too early for you, sweetheart," I said, setting down my pen and giving her my full attention. "How are you doing? How's Marcus? And the kids?" "Everyone's great, Mom. Actually, that's why I'm calling. We've been talking, and we want to do something really special for Thanksgiving this year. Something meaningful and traditional, you know? And we all agreed that nobody does Thanksgiving like you did when we were kids." A warmth spread through my chest at her words. It had been 3 years since Robert passed, and the holidays hadn't been the same. Sarah and her brother Michael usually did their own thing with their respective families, leaving me to spend the day alone or with Robert's sister, who was pleasant enough but never quite filled the silence that had settled over my house like dust on old furniture. "Oh, that's lovely, dear. What did you have in mind?" "Well, we were thinking you could host it at your place. You know, make it like the old days when Dad was still with us. The whole family together, all your amazing dishes, everyone gathered around your dining room table. Marcus's parents want to come, and his sister Jenny with her family, and of course, Michael and Lisa with their kids, and maybe even some of our close friends who don't have family nearby." I felt a flutter of excitement mixed with anxiety. "How many people are we talking about, Sarah?" "Oh, not too many. Maybe 20, 25 at the most. Nothing you can't handle, Mom. You always used to cook for huge crowds when we were growing up." 25 people. I tried to picture my dining room, which could maybe seat 10 if I borrowed some folding chairs. I thought about my kitchen, which had seemed so spacious when Robert and I bought the house 45 years ago, but now felt cramped even when I was cooking for one. But then I imagined the house full of voices and laughter again, children running around, the kind of warmth that had been missing since Robert's funeral. "I don't know, honey. That's a lot of cooking, and I'm not as young as I used to be." "Mom, come on. You're in better shape than most people half your age. And besides, we'll all help. It'll be a family effort. We just want you to coordinate everything, you know? Be the heart of it all, like you always were." The heart of it all. Those words wrapped around something tender inside me. Something that had been aching for purpose since Robert died. In those first months after the funeral, people had surrounded me with casseroles and sympathy. But as time passed, the visits became fewer, the phone calls less frequent. My children checked in, of course, but they had their own lives, their own problems. I understood that. I really did. But understanding didn't make the silence any less deafening. "What would you need me to make?" I asked, already mentally going through my recipe boxes. "Oh, all the classics. Turkey, of course. Maybe 2 turkeys, actually, to make sure there's enough. And your famous stuffing, the cornbread one with the sausage and apples, and your green bean casserole, the one with the caramelized onions. Oh, and your mashed potatoes. Nobody makes them like you do. And sweet potato casserole, and cranberry sauce from scratch. Not that canned stuff. And rolls. Definitely your dinner rolls. They're legendary, Mom." I was already making a list in my head, calculating cooking times and oven space. "What about dessert?" "Well, we were hoping you could do your apple pie, and maybe that pumpkin cheesecake you used to make, and some of those little pecan tarts. Oh, and Marcus specifically requested your bread pudding with the bourbon sauce." My head was spinning. I counted up the dishes she'd mentioned. That was already more than a dozen, and she was still talking. "And maybe some appetizers? Your spinach and artichoke dip is always a hit, and those little meatballs you make, and the deviled eggs. Oh, and we should probably have some lighter options too, like a salad and maybe some vegetables." "Sarah," I interrupted gently, "that's a lot of food. Are you sure we need all of that?" "Mom, we want this to be perfect. We want everyone to remember this Thanksgiving forever, and nobody cooks like you do. Besides, leftovers are the best part of Thanksgiving, right?" I thought about my social security check, which barely covered my monthly expenses even with the house paid off. Groceries had gotten so expensive lately, and feeding 25 people would cost several $100s at least. But Sarah seemed so excited, so hopeful, and I hadn't heard her sound this enthusiastic about spending time with me in years. "I suppose I could manage it," I said slowly. "But honey, the grocery bill is going to be pretty steep for all that food." There was a pause on the other end of the line, and I could almost hear Sarah's mental gears turning. "Oh, Mom, don't worry about that. We'll all chip in for groceries. This is a family effort, remember? Nobody expects you to pay for everything on top of doing all the cooking." Relief washed over me. Of course they'd help with expenses. Sarah and Marcus both had good jobs, and Michael was doing well with his construction business. It only made sense that they'd contribute to a meal they were all going to enjoy. "Okay then. I think we can make this work. When do you want to do this?" "Thanksgiving Day, of course. We were thinking dinner around 2 o'clock. That gives everyone time to sleep in and work up an appetite." 2 o'clock. I was already calculating backwards. To have everything ready by 2, I'd need to get up at 4 in the morning to start the turkeys. Actually, probably earlier than that, and I'd need to do most of the prep work in the days leading up to it. "This is going to be amazing, Mom. Everyone is so excited. Marcus's mom has been bragging to her friends about how she gets to experience a real Norma Jackson Thanksgiving. You're like a legend in our family. You know that?" A legend. I felt a smile tugging at the corners of my mouth despite my growing anxiety about the logistics. When was the last time anyone had made me feel important, necessary, valued for something other than birthday cards and Christmas gifts? "I'm excited too, sweetheart. It'll be wonderful to have the house full again." "It really will. Oh, and Mom, could you make sure to clean the guest bathroom and maybe put out some nice hand towels? Marcus's parents are kind of particular about that stuff." "Of course. And maybe we could move some of the furniture around in the living room to make more seating. We want everyone to be comfortable." "Whatever you need, dear." "You're the best, Mom. I'll call you later this week to go over all the details. Okay? And I'll send you a final head count once everyone confirms." After I hung up, I sat in my kitchen for a long time, staring at the list I'd started writing. The house felt different already, filled with possibility and purpose. For the first time in months, I had something to look forward to, something that would make me feel useful and needed. I spent the rest of the morning walking through the house, seeing it through the eyes of 25 guests. The dining room would need a thorough cleaning, and I'd have to figure out how to seat everyone. Maybe I could borrow some card tables from the church and set up a children's table in the living room. The guest bathroom definitely needed updating. When was the last time I'd replaced those towels? And the kitchen would need to be organized for maximum efficiency. That afternoon, I drove to the grocery store just to scout out prices and start thinking about quantities. 2 turkeys, probably 18 to 20 pounds each, 15 pounds of potatoes, 3 dozen eggs for all those deviled eggs. The numbers were staggering, but the excitement I felt outweighed my anxiety. This was going to be the Thanksgiving. To end all Thanksgivings, I called my neighbor Mrs. Chen that evening to share the news. Eleanor Chen had been my closest friend since Robert's death, partly because she understood the particular loneliness of widowhood, and partly because she had no patience for self-pity, which kept me from wallowing too deeply in my grief. 25. People? Eleanor's voice was skeptical. Norma, that's restaurant-level catering. Are you sure you want to take this on? It'll be fine, I said, though I was already second-guessing myself. Sarah said they'll all help. And what kind of help did she offer exactly? I paused, trying to remember. Well, they're going to chip in for groceries. And I'm sure they'll help with setup and cleanup. Did she say that specifically? Not in so many words, but it's implied, don't you think? I mean, they wouldn't expect me to do everything myself. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Eleanor was quiet for a moment. Norma, honey, I love your children. You know I do. But when was the last time Sarah helped you with anything without being asked 3 times? That's not fair, Eleanor. She has a demanding job and 2 teenagers. She's busy. So are you. You volunteer at the food bank twice a week. You're on the church hospitality committee. You drive Mrs. Patterson to her doctor appointments because she can't see well enough to drive anymore. Just because you're retired doesn't mean your time isn't valuable. I felt a flicker of irritation at Eleanor's negativity. She meant well, but sometimes her pragmatism felt like pessimism. This is different. This is family. And I want to do this. I need to do this. The need in my voice must have gotten through to her, because her tone softened. Okay, honey. But promise me you'll ask for help when you need it. And promise me you'll speak up if this gets to be too much. I promise. But even as I said it, I knew I wouldn't. I couldn't remember the last time I'd asked my children for help with anything significant, and I wasn't about to start now. This was my chance to show them that I was still capable, still valuable, still the mother who could make everything perfect for everyone else. The next morning, I started making lists. Shopping lists, cooking schedules, cleaning tasks. I pulled out all my recipe cards and started calculating quantities. 3 cups of flour for 1 batch of dinner rolls, so 9 cups for 3 batches. But would 3 batches be enough for 25 people? Better make it 4 batches to be safe. I spent hours online researching cooking schedules for large groups, reading articles about how to coordinate multiple dishes, watching YouTube videos about Thanksgiving prep. My dining room table became command central, covered with notebooks, and printouts and lists written on the backs of envelopes. Sarah called again on Thursday, full of updates and additional requests. Mom, great news. Marcus's cousin Derek is coming after all, and he's bringing his new girlfriend. So make that 27 people. And Marcus's mom mentioned that she's been trying to eat more vegetables lately, so maybe you could add a roasted vegetable medley. And Derek's girlfriend is vegetarian, so we should probably have some vegetarian options. Vegetarian options. I hadn't even considered that. What did you have in mind? Oh, I don't know. Maybe a vegetarian stuffing? And some kind of vegetarian protein, like a nut roast or something? I'm sure you can figure it out. I made more notes, my list growing longer by the minute. Sarah, I need to talk to you about the grocery bill. I went to the store yesterday to price things out, and we're looking at close to $400. For everything. $400? That seems like a lot. It's a lot of food, honey. 2 turkeys alone are going to be almost $80, and that's if I can find them on sale. Well, let me talk to Marcus and see what we can do. Maybe everyone can contribute something. That would be helpful. I was thinking maybe $50 per family? That would cover most of it. $50 per family seems pretty steep, Mom. I mean, we're already giving up our whole day to come over there. Something cold settled in my stomach at her words, but I pushed it aside. Of course, dear. We'll figure something out. Oh, and one more thing. Marcus's dad has some dietary restrictions I forgot to mention. He can't have too much salt or butter, doctor's orders. So maybe you could make some of the dishes with less seasoning. Less seasoning. I thought about my famous mashed potatoes, which got their richness from butter and cream. My green bean casserole, which relied on a carefully balanced blend of herbs and spices. How do you make food for 27 people that satisfies everyone's dietary restrictions, taste preferences, and expectations? I'll do my best, I said. After I hung up, I sat at my dining room table surrounded by my growing lists and felt the first real stirring of panic. What had I gotten myself into? But then I looked around at my quiet house, at the empty chairs, and silent rooms, and I knew I'd rather be overwhelmed with family than underwhelmed with solitude. Over the next few days, the requests kept coming. Sarah called to ask if I could make sure to have coffee and tea available all day, not just with dessert. Michael called to request his favorite cornbread stuffing, but mentioned that Lisa was trying to avoid gluten, so could I make a gluten-free version too? Marcus called directly to ask if I could make extra gravy because his family went through it fast, and also to confirm that I'd be making both white and dark meat gravy. Each phone call added to my list, and each addition made the project feel more daunting. But each phone call also reinforced how important this meal was to everyone, how much they were counting on me to make it perfect. I started shopping a week before Thanksgiving, buying non-perishables and items that could be frozen. My grocery cart was so full I could barely push it, and the checkout total made my stomach clench even though I'd been expecting it. $327 for the first shopping trip, with fresh ingredients still to buy. The house began to transform as I prepared. I rearranged furniture to make more space, borrowed tables and chairs from the church, polished silver that hadn't been used since Robert's funeral. I cleaned obsessively, scrubbing baseboards and washing windows and organizing closets in case anyone needed to hang up a coat. Eleanor stopped by on the Saturday before Thanksgiving and found me in the kitchen, surrounded by mixing bowls and measuring cups, making 3 different types of pie crust from scratch. Norma, you look exhausted. When was the last time you sat down? I'm fine, I said, though my back was aching from standing for hours and my hands were cramping from all the mixing and kneading. I want everything to be perfect. Perfect for whom? Are you enjoying any of this? I paused in my rolling and considered the question. Was I enjoying it? The constant anxiety about timing, the physical exhaustion, the growing expense, the pressure to satisfy everyone's individual requests? But then I thought about Thanksgiving Day, about my house full of family, about being needed and appreciated and essential to everyone's happiness. I'm enjoying the anticipation, I said finally. I'm enjoying having something important to do. Eleanor studied my face with the kind of attention that made me want to look away. Honey, you're important whether you cook for 27 people or not. You know that, right? Of course I know that. But even as I said it, I wondered, if it was true, when was the last time anyone had called me just to talk, not because they needed something? When was the last time anyone had asked for my opinion on something that mattered? When was the last time I'd felt like anything other than a pleasant obligation to be checked off a list? I'm worried about you taking on too much. It's just one day, Eleanor. One meal. I can handle one meal. But as I said it, looking at my kitchen covered in the evidence of days of preparation, I wasn't entirely sure I believed it myself. The Monday before Thanksgiving, I did my final grocery shopping. Fresh vegetables, herbs, cream, eggs, butter. The dairy case alone cost me $67. I stood in the checkout line with my second cart of the week, watching the total climb higher and higher, and tried to calculate how much of my monthly budget I'd already spent. But it was too late to back out now. The invitations had been sent, the tables borrowed, the menu planned. In 4 days, 27 people would be sitting in my house expecting the feast of their lives, and I was going to give it to them. That night, I sat down with my final timeline, mapping out every dish, every cooking time, every oven temperature change. I would start at 3 in the morning with the turkeys. The pies could be finished the night before. The vegetables could be prepped on Wednesday. It was going to be the most logistically complex thing I'd ever attempted, but I was as ready as I could be. I fell asleep that night with my lists on the nightstand and my alarm set for 3 a.m., dreaming of a house full of grateful family members telling me that this was the best Thanksgiving they'd ever had. In my dream, Sarah hugged me tight and told me I was amazing, that she didn't know how I did it all, that she was lucky to have such an incredible mother. If only I'd known then what I know now. If only I'd listened to the small voice in the back of my head that was already asking what would happen after everyone went home, after the dishes were done, after the leftovers were distributed and the house fell silent again. But I didn't listen to that voice. I was too busy being grateful that someone, anyone, needed me enough to ask for everything I had to give. The alarm screamed at 3 in the morning, jolting me from a restless sleep. Filled with dreams of burning turkeys and empty tables, my body protested as I swung my legs over the side of the bed, joints stiff from yesterday's marathon of vegetable chopping and pie crust rolling. The house was dark and cold, November air seeping through the old windows that Robert had always promised to replace but never got around to. I shuffled to the kitchen in my bathrobe and slippers, flicking on lights as I went. The sight that greeted me should have been encouraging. Everything organized and ready, prep work completed, timelines posted on the refrigerator, but instead, it felt overwhelming. 27 people. In 12 hours, my quiet house would be bursting with voices and expectations and needs I wasn't sure I could meet. The turkeys sat in their roasting pans like pale, lifeless monuments to my ambition. 22 pounds and 18 pounds respectively. They'd been thawing in my refrigerator for 3 days, taking up so much space I'd had to store other ingredients in coolers on the back porch. My hands shook slightly as I removed the giblet, packages, and began the process of seasoning and stuffing them. Robert used to help me with the turkeys on the rare occasions we'd hosted large gatherings. He'd hold them steady while I worked, making jokes about wishbones and turkey pardons to keep me from getting too stressed about the timing. Now I wrestled with them alone, my arthritic fingers struggling with the trussing twine, my lower back already aching from bending over the counter. By 4:30, both birds were in the oven, and I allowed myself 5 minutes to sit down with a cup of coffee. The kitchen was warm now, filled with the promising smell of roasting meat, and for a moment I felt that old familiar satisfaction of a job begun well. But the moment was brief. I had 16 other dishes to prepare, and the clock was my enemy. The stuffing came next, 3 different varieties to accommodate various dietary restrictions and preferences. The traditional cornbread stuffing that Michael loved, with its mix of sage sausage and tart apples. The gluten-free version for Lisa, made with rice bread that had cost me $12 for one small loaf. And the vegetarian version for Derek's girlfriend, whose name I still didn't know despite her being the reason for an entirely separate set of dishes. As I sautéed onions and celery, diced apples, and crumbled cornbread, my mind drifted to other Thanksgivings, easier ones. When Sarah and Michael were young, before they had their own families and complications, we'd host maybe 8 or 10 people at most. Robert's parents, my sister and her husband, a neighbor or two who didn't have family nearby. The cooking had been manageable then, almost leisurely. We'd start preparations the day before, work together in easy companionship, taste test everything, and laugh about the disasters. I remembered one year when Sarah was maybe 12 and Michael 10, and Sarah had insisted on helping with the mashed potatoes. She'd gotten distracted watching the Macy's parade and forgotten about them on the stove, until they were a scorched, lumpy mess. We'd laughed until we cried, then sent Robert to the store for instant potatoes, which we doctored up with butter and cream, and served with great ceremony as Sarah's special recipe. When had cooking for family stopped being joyful and started feeling like a performance review where failure wasn't an option? By 6 a.m., the stuffings were assembled and waiting their turn in the oven. I started on the sweet potato casserole, peeling and chopping 10 pounds of sweet potatoes, my fingers stained orange and my shoulders burning from the repetitive motion. The kitchen was getting crowded now, every burner occupied, every inch of counter space claimed by ingredients or completed dishes waiting to be reheated. I thought about calling Sarah to let her know how things were progressing, maybe mention that I could use some help with the final preparations. But it was 6 in the morning, and Sarah never appreciated early phone calls. Besides, she'd told me just yesterday that she planned to sleep in since they didn't have to be here until 2. Sleep in. I couldn't remember the last time I'd had the luxury of sleeping past 7, even on weekends. The sweet potatoes went into the food processor in batches, and I added eggs, butter, brown sugar, cinnamon, nutmeg. The mixture was supposed to be smooth and creamy, but my old food processor wheezed and struggled, leaving lumps that I had to work out by hand. My hands were cramping now, muscles protesting the constant gripping and stirring and lifting. At 7:30, Eleanor knocked on my back door, letting herself in with the key I'd given her years ago. "Dear God, Norma, what time did you get up?" She took in the chaos of my kitchen, the sweat on my forehead despite the November chill, the way I was leaning heavily against the counter between tasks. 3, I said, not looking up from the green beans I was trimming. Had to get the turkeys started. "You look exhausted already, and you still have 7 hours to go." "I'm fine." It was becoming my standard response, though we both knew it wasn't true. Just need to pace myself. Eleanor poured herself a cup of coffee from the pot I'd made at 3:30 and sat down at my kitchen table, the only surface not covered with food or cooking equipment. "What can I do to help?" The question hung in the air between us. What could she do? Everything was timed down to the minute, every dish calibrated for specific dietary requirements I didn't fully understand. The truth was, having help at this point would slow me down more than speed me up, because I'd have to explain everything, supervise everything, worry about whether it was being done right. "I've got it under control," I said, though my hands were shaking as I snapped the ends off green beans. "Everything's planned out." "Norma, honey, sit down for a minute. Just 5 minutes." "Can't. The potatoes need to be started and I haven't even begun the appetizers yet." Eleanor watched me in silence for a few minutes, and I could feel her disapproval radiating across the kitchen. She thought I was being foolish, taking on too much, trying to prove something that didn't need proving. Maybe she was right, but it was too late now. 27 people were expecting a feast, and I was going to give them one if it killed me. By 9 a.m., the kitchen smelled like Thanksgiving. The turkeys were browning beautifully, filling the house with that rich, promising aroma that meant family and abundance and love. But I was starting to feel the physical toll of 6 hours of constant motion. My feet ached in my sensible shoes. My back screamed every time I bent over to check the oven, and my hands were raw from washing and chopping and stirring. The mashed potatoes were the next challenge. 15 pounds of russets, which seemed reasonable when I'd written it on my list, but felt monumental as I stood at the sink, peeling potato after potato after potato. My fingers were numb from the cold water, and I'd already nicked myself twice, with the peeler, leaving small spots of blood that I had to rinse away. Let me help with those, Eleanor said, standing up from the table where she'd been pretending to read the newspaper while actually monitoring my increasing desperation. No, I've got a system, I said, though my system seemed to be moving at the pace of continental drift. Besides, you don't know how I like them cut. I think I can figure out how to peel a potato, Norma. But I couldn't let go of control, not even for something as simple as potato peeling. What if she cut them? Too thick and they didn't cook evenly? What if she left eyes or didn't peel deep enough? What if Sarah or Marcus noticed that the potatoes weren't quite right and wondered why I hadn't been more careful? Eleanor gave up trying to help and just stayed, occasionally refilling my coffee cup or handing me ingredients from across the kitchen. Her presence was comforting even if I couldn't accept her assistance. At least someone knew what I was going through, even if she thought I was crazy for putting myself through it. At 10:30, Sarah called. "Hi, Mom. Just checking in. How's everything going?" I looked around my disaster of a kitchen, at the pile of potato peels threatening to overflow the garbage can, at the growing stack of dirty bowls and utensils that I hadn't had time to wash, at my sweat-stained shirt and the exhaustion I could feel in every muscle. "Everything's fine, sweetheart. Right on schedule." "That's great. We're so excited. Marcus has been talking about your bread pudding all week. You are making the bread pudding, right?" The bread pudding. I'd forgotten about the bread pudding. It wasn't on my main timeline because I'd planned to make it yesterday, but yesterday had been consumed with pie making and vegetable prep and all the other last-minute tasks that had seemed manageable when I'd written them down, but had expanded to fill every available hour. "Of course," I said, just putting the finishing touches on it now. "Perfect. Oh, and I forgot to mention, Marcus's mom is bringing her friend Ruth. She didn't have anywhere to go for Thanksgiving, and you know how you always say there's room for one more at your table. One more. 28 people now." I looked at my dining room, where I'd already pushed the limits of physics to seat 27 people, and wondered where I was going to put Ruth. "That's fine, dear. The more the merrier." "You're the best." "Mom, we'll see you at 2. Oh, and could you make sure to have some wine glasses out? Marcus is bringing a couple bottles of wine, and you know how particular he is about having the right glasses." Wine glasses. I hadn't even thought about wine glasses. How many did I have? 8, maybe 10 at most. Certainly not enough for 28 people who might want wine with dinner. After I hung up, I stood in my kitchen and felt the first real wave of panic wash over me: the bread pudding, wine glasses for 28 people, an extra place setting that I didn't have room for. And it was almost 11 a.m., which meant I had 3 hours to finish 16 dishes and somehow transform my house into a space that could accommodate more people than it was designed to hold. "What did she want?" Eleanor asked, though she'd probably heard my side of the conversation. "Nothing important. Just checking in." Eleanor's look told me she knew I was lying, but she didn't push. Instead, she got up and started washing the dishes I'd been accumulating in the sink. I wanted to protest, to maintain my illusion of control, but I didn't have the energy to fight about it anymore. The next 2 hours passed in a blur of increasing desperation. I made the bread pudding with day-old French bread and a custard base that would have to bake alongside everything else in my increasingly crowded oven. I set up a card table in the living room for the overflow guests, covering it with a tablecloth. That didn't quite match the dining room, but would have to do. I counted and recounted place settings, moved furniture to create more space, and tried to figure out how to serve 28 people with serving dishes meant for 8. The cranberry sauce was bubbling on the stovetop, filling the house with the tart smell of berries and orange zest. The green bean casserole was assembled and waiting its turn in the oven. The dinner rolls were rising in their pans, perfect golden spheres of possibility. From the outside, everything looked like it was coming together beautifully. But inside, I was falling apart. My hands wouldn't stop shaking, whether from exhaustion or caffeine or pure anxiety, I couldn't tell. My back was on fire from hours of bending and lifting and stirring. I'd been on my feet for 9 hours straight, and the day was far from over. The real work, coordinating the final cooking, timing everything to be ready simultaneously, serving and hosting and being gracious, was still ahead of me. At 12:30, I looked at my timeline and realized I was behind schedule. The turkeys needed to come out to rest, but the stuffing wasn't ready to go in yet. The potatoes were boiled but not mashed. The vegetables were prepped but not cooked. I had 90 minutes to finish everything, and I was moving like I was underwater. Eleanor must have seen something in my face, because she put down the dish towel she'd been using and walked over to me. "Norma, you need to call Sarah and ask for help, right now." "I can't. They'll be here soon anyway." "They could be here now if you asked them to come early. You don't have to do this alone." But I did have to do it alone, because asking for help felt like admitting failure. And failure wasn't an option when 28 people were counting on me to give them the perfect Thanksgiving, when this was my chance to prove that I was still valuable, still capable, still worth the trouble of including in their busy lives. "I'm fine," I said for the 100th time that day, though we both knew it was the biggest lie I'd ever told. At 1 o'clock, I was mashing potatoes with a hand masher because my electric mixer had given up after the third batch. My arms felt like rubber, and the potatoes were getting gluey from overworking, but I couldn't stop. People would be arriving in an hour, and nothing was ready. The turkeys were resting under foil, looking magnificent and golden brown. The stuffing was in the oven, bubbling around the edges. But I still had to make gravy, finish the vegetables, warm the rolls, plate the appetizers, and somehow make myself presentable enough to greet my guests without looking like I'd been through a war. Eleanor had given up trying to convince me, to accept help, and had simply taken over whatever tasks she could manage without my approval. She was arranging appetizers on platters, filling water glasses, folding napkins. Her quiet efficiency was the only thing keeping me from complete collapse. At 1:30, I caught sight of myself in the reflection of the oven door. My hair was falling out of its bun, my face was red and sweaty, my shirt was stained with various food items I couldn't identify. I looked like exactly what I was, a 73-year-old woman who had taken on more than she could handle and was barely holding it together. But there was no time to worry about my appearance. The first guests would arrive any minute, and I still had to carve the turkeys, finish the gravy, and somehow transform the chaos of my kitchen into the seamless abundance my family was expecting. As I stood at my stove, stirring gravy with one hand and checking the oven temperature with the other, I wondered if this was what love was supposed to feel like. This bone-deep exhaustion, this anxiety that left me shaking, this desperate need to prove my worth through service and sacrifice. In my heart, I knew something was wrong with this picture. But I was too tired and too committed to the performance to think about it clearly. 28 people were about to walk through my door expecting magic, and magic was what I was going to give them, even if it killed me. The doorbell rang at exactly 2 o'clock, and my heart jumped into my throat. Showtime. I smoothed my hair, wiped my hands on my apron, and prepared to greet my family with the smile I'd been practicing all morning. The smile that said everything was perfect, everything was under control, everything had been effortless. If only they could have seen what that smile cost me. I opened the door to find Sarah standing there with her phone raised, already taking pictures before I'd even had a chance to greet her properly. Behind her stood Marcus, their 2 teenagers Emma and Josh, and an elderly woman I assumed must be Marcus's mother's friend Ruth. They were all dressed like they were going to a restaurant, not a family dinner. Sarah in a crisp cream-colored sweater and dark slacks, Marcus in a button-down shirt and khakis, the kids looking like they'd rather be anywhere else. "Mom, you look." Sarah paused, her camera still raised, clearly taking in my disheveled appearance. "You look like you've been working hard. This is going to be so authentic and homey." Authentic and homey. The words stung more than they should have. I'd spent 11 hours trying to create something special, something worthy of their time and attention, and I looked authentic and homey, rather than elegant and accomplished. Come in, I said, stepping aside to let them pass. Everything's almost ready. The house was indeed ready, at least visually. The dining room table gleamed under the chandelier, set with my good china and the mismatched silverware I'd polished until it shone. The living room had been transformed with the additional card table, every surface decorated with small pumpkins and autumn leaves Eleanor had helped me arrange. The smell of turkey and stuffing and all the other dishes created an atmosphere of abundance and warmth. "Oh, wow, Mom. This looks incredible," Sarah said, snapping more pictures. "Marcus, get a shot of me with Mom in front of the dining room table." I found myself posing for pictures I hadn't expected, trying to smile naturally while my exhausted body screamed for rest. Marcus dutifully took photo after photo while Sarah adjusted her hair and changed poses, directing me to stand straighter, smile bigger, look more festive. "These are going to be perfect for my Instagram," she said, scrolling through the photos on Marcus's phone. "My followers are going to die when they see this spread. #blessed, #family traditions, #homemade everything." More guests arrived in quick succession. Michael and Lisa with their 3 young children, followed by Marcus's parents Barbara and Frank, then Derek with his girlfriend whose name turned out to be Melody, then a steady stream of people I'd met only briefly at other family gatherings. Each arrival brought more exclamations about how amazing everything looked, more photo opportunities, more requests for me to pose and smile and look like the perfect grandmother hosting the perfect family gathering. But no one offered to help, carry anything from the kitchen. No one asked if there was anything they could do to assist with the final preparations. They all seemed to assume that the food would appear on the table through some sort of magic that didn't require any effort on their part. I excused myself to check on the final dishes, my legs unsteady after standing for so many hours. In the kitchen, Eleanor was putting the finishing touches on the gravy, stirring it carefully to prevent lumps. "How are you holding up?" she asked, quietly. "Fine," I said automatically, though I felt anything but fine. My head was pounding, my hands were still shaking, and I had that disconnected feeling that comes from pushing your body beyond its limits. I just need to get everything on the table. "I can help you carry things out." "No, I should do it. They're expecting me to present everything properly." Eleanor gave me a look that suggested she had opinions about what my family was expecting. But she didn't argue. Instead, she helped me load serving dishes and platters, creating an assembly line that made the final preparations manageable. The moment of truth came when I began carrying dishes to the dining room. The turkey, golden and glistening, drew appreciative murmurs from the gathered family. The stuffing, the mashed potatoes, the sweet potato casserole, the green bean casserole, each dish was met with photographs and compliments and expressions of amazement at the quantity and variety of food. "Norma, this is incredible," said Barbara, Marcus's mother. "I can't believe you did all this yourself. When Marcus told me you were cooking everything, I thought he must be exaggerating." "It was nothing," I said, though we both knew that wasn't true. I love cooking for family. The seating arrangement was tight, even with the additional card table. The adults squeezed around the main dining room table, while the teenagers and younger children made do with the makeshift setup in the Bowie living room. Everyone seemed cheerful enough about the accommodation, treating it like an adventure rather than an inconvenience. I took my place at the head of the table, the spot where Robert used to sit, and looked around at the faces of my extended family. This was what I'd been working toward for the past week, this moment of connection, of being surrounded by the people I loved most, of being the center of something important and meaningful. Marcus stood up with his wine glass raised. "I'd like to make a toast," he announced, and the room fell quiet. "To Norma, who has outdone herself today. This spread is absolutely incredible, and we are so grateful for all the work you put into making this day special for all of us." The room erupted in agreement, Glasses raised, voices calling out, "To Norma," and "Thank you," and "This is amazing." For a moment, I felt the rush of satisfaction I'd been chasing, the acknowledgement, the appreciation, the sense that my efforts had been worthwhile. But then everyone sat down and began eating, and that feeling faded as quickly as it had come. The conversation flowed around me, family members catching up on work and school and neighborhood gossip. The food disappeared at an alarming rate. 28 people making quick work of dishes that had taken me days to prepare. I found myself barely eating, too busy monitoring the serving dishes, jumping up to refill water glasses and fetch forgotten items from the kitchen, making sure everyone had everything they needed. "Mom, sit down and eat," Sarah said when she noticed me hovering with the gravy boat. "Everything's perfect." But I couldn't sit down, couldn't relax, couldn't stop feeling responsible for everyone's comfort and satisfaction. Every empty serving dish felt like a failure on my part. Every request for seconds sent me scurrying back to the kitchen to check supplies. Every compliment felt conditional, dependent on my continued performance as the perfect hostess. The teenagers at the card table were focused on their phones, barely engaging with the food or the conversation. The younger children were restless, more interested in playing than eating. The adults were absorbed in their own discussions, treating the meal like background to their socializing rather than the centerpiece of the gathering. I watched Derek's girlfriend Melody pick at the vegetarian options I'd prepared specially for her, eating tiny portions and leaving most of it untouched. I saw Frank, Marcus's father, reach for the regular mashed potatoes, instead of the low-sodium version I'd made for his dietary restrictions. I noticed several people taking photos of their plates before eating, documenting the meal for social media rather than simply enjoying it. "Norma, you have to give me the recipe for this stuffing," said Jenny, Marcus's sister. "It's exactly like something my grandmother used to make." "Of course," I said, though I wondered if she'd ever actually make it herself or if she was just being polite. "I'll write it down for you." "And the sweet potato casserole," added Barbara. "I've been trying to recreate my mother's recipe for years, but this is even better." More recipe requests, more promises to write things down, more compliments that felt genuine in the moment, but somehow hollow underneath. They loved the food, appreciated the effort, enjoyed the abundance. But did they understand what it had cost me? Did they have any idea what I'd put myself through to create this experience for them? As the meal progressed, I noticed something that made my stomach clench with anxiety. People were eating quickly, mechanically, like they had somewhere else to be. Conversations were punctuated by glances at phones and watches. The atmosphere, while pleasant, felt rushed rather than leisurely, efficient rather than intimate. "This has been absolutely wonderful," said Ruth, the last-minute addition, who'd barely spoken during the meal. "But I should probably head out soon. I have an early day tomorrow." "Head out soon?" It wasn't even 3:30, and people were already thinking about leaving? I'd imagined this gathering lasting well into the evening, with multiple rounds of dessert and coffee, with people lingering at the table telling stories and enjoying each other's company. "Oh, dessert hasn't even been served yet," I said, perhaps more desperately than I'd intended. I made apple pie and pumpkin cheesecake and pecan tarts and bread pudding. "Mom, that sounds amazing," Sarah said. "But we're all so full from this incredible meal. Maybe we could just take some dessert to go." To go. They wanted to take dessert to go rather than staying to enjoy it together. The pies I'd spent 2 days making, the bread pudding that had been Marcus's special request, the pecan tarts that had required hand-placing individual pecans in perfect spirals. They wanted to box it up like leftovers from a restaurant. "Actually," Marcus said, checking his phone, "we should probably start thinking about heading out too. My parents want to stop by my sister's place before it gets too late, and the kids have homework to finish before school tomorrow." My sister's place. Marcus's sister, who apparently was also hosting some sort of Thanksgiving gathering. a gathering they were planning to attend after spending exactly 90 minutes at mine. "We're doing dessert at Jenny's," Barbara explained, as if that made it better. "She's having a few people over for coffee and pie. Nothing elaborate like this, of course. Just a small, casual get-together." The words hit me like a physical blow. They were leaving my elaborate, carefully planned, exhaustively prepared feast to go to Jenny's casual get-together. All my work, all my preparation, all my dreams of a lingering family gathering, and I was just the first stop on their Thanksgiving tour. "That sounds lovely," I managed to say, though my voice sounded strange and distant to my own ears. "Of course you should go. Family time is important." The cleanup began almost immediately, with people standing up from the table while others were still finishing their last bites. Dishes were stacked haphazardly, serving platters scraped clean and abandoned on the sideboard. The beautiful presentation I'd worked so hard to create was dismantled with the same efficiency that people might use to clear a cafeteria table. "Don't worry about the dishes, Mom," Sarah said, though she made no move to help with them herself. "You've done enough for one day." "Actually, maybe we should pack up some leftovers before we go," Michael suggested. "No point in leaving Norma with all this food." Leftovers. The word made my chest tight with something that felt like grief. These weren't leftovers. This was food I'd prepared with love and care. Food that was meant to nourish and satisfy and bring people together. But within 2 hours of its presentation, it had been reduced to leftovers to be divided up and carted away. The next 20 minutes were a flurry of activity as people claimed containers and bags, dividing up the remains of my Thanksgiving feast like they were settling an estate. The turkey was carved down to the bone, the stuffing portioned out into individual servings, the side dishes distributed among various family members who would take them home to stretch out their own meals for the rest of the week. "This turkey will make great sandwiches," Derek commented as he loaded slices into a container. "Thanks for doing all the heavy lifting, Norma." Heavy lifting. That's all it had been to him. Heavy lifting that I'd been happy to do so he didn't have to bother with it himself. Emma, Sarah's 16-year-old daughter, was busy taking selfies with the remains of the feast, posing with pie slices and making exaggerated, grateful faces for her social media followers. "This is so going to get me tons of likes," she said to her brother Josh. "Look how aesthetic this all looks." Aesthetic. My exhausting labor, my aching body, my depleted bank account. It was all just aesthetic content for a teenager's Instagram account. As people began putting on their coats and gathering their bags of leftovers, the thank yous came in a rush of polite efficiency. Everyone was grateful. Everyone was appreciative. Everyone had enjoyed themselves immensely. But their gratitude felt perfunctory, obligatory, the kind of thanks you give to a service provider rather than a family member. "Mom, this was absolutely perfect," Sarah said, giving me a quick hug that smelled of her expensive perfume. "You really outdid yourself. Everyone's going to be talking about this meal for years." Years. They'd be talking about it for years, but they couldn't stay for more than 90 minutes to actually experience it. "We should do this again next year," Marcus said, shaking my hand like we'd just concluded a business transaction. "Maybe we could even make it bigger. Invite more people. Really make it a tradition. Bigger. More people. More work for me to do, more expenses for me to absorb, more effort for me to expend so that more people could eat quickly and leave early for more important gatherings elsewhere." One by one, they filed out of my house, carrying their containers of food and their satisfied expressions. The hugs were brief. The promises to call soon were automatic. The expressions of gratitude were genuine, but somehow inadequate to the scale of what I'd given them. And then they were gone. I stood in my doorway, still wearing my stained apron, still aching from 11 hours of preparation and presentation, watching their cars pull away from my house. The November air was cold against my face, and I realized I was shivering, though I wasn't sure if it was from the temperature or from something deeper. Behind me, the house that had been so full of voices and laughter and life just minutes before was now silent, except for the hum of the refrigerator and the tick of the grandfather clock in the hallway. The dining room table was bare except for a few forgotten napkins and water rings on the wood. The living room looked like a disaster zone, with crumbs on the carpet and chairs pushed askew, and the card table still covered with dirty dishes that no one had bothered to clear. Eleanor emerged from the kitchen, where she'd been quietly washing dishes throughout the departure chaos. "Well," she said, her voice carefully neutral. That was something. I closed the front door and leaned against it, suddenly feeling every one of my 73 years. "It was exactly what I planned," I said, though even as I said it, I knew it wasn't true. Was it? I looked around at the aftermath of my perfect Thanksgiving, the empty serving dishes, the scattered chairs, the silence that felt heavier than the noise that had preceded it. They enjoyed themselves. Everyone said the food was wonderful. The food was wonderful, but how do you feel? How did I feel? Exhausted, obviously, depleted, used up, but also something else, something I didn't want to name because naming it would make it real. "I feel fine," I said, because it was easier than admitting the truth. "A little tired, maybe, but that's normal after a big meal like that." Eleanor studied my face with the kind of attention that made me want to look away. "Norma, they were here for less than 2 hours. Quality time is more important than quantity." "Is it? Because from where I was standing, it looked like you spent a week preparing for 90 minutes of people eating your food and then leaving for a better party." The words hit me like a slap, partly because they were harsh, but mostly because they were true. I wanted to defend my family, to explain that they had busy lives and multiple obligations and couldn't be expected to spend their entire day at my house. But the defense felt hollow even in my own mind. "They have other commitments," I said weakly. "So do you. Or you should. When was the last time someone else cooked for you? When was the last time someone else did the work while you got to relax and enjoy yourself?" I couldn't remember. Not since Robert died, certainly. Maybe not even before that. I'd always been the one who did the cooking, the planning, the organizing. It was my role, my contribution, my way of showing love. "This is how I show people. I care about them," I said. "And how do they show they care about you?" The question hung in the air between us, unanswered, because I didn't have a good answer. They called, occasionally. They remembered my birthday and Mother's Day. They included me in family gatherings when it was convenient for them. But when was the last time any of them had gone out of their way to do something special for me? When was the last time any of them had sacrificed their comfort or convenience for my benefit? I looked around at my house, at the evidence of my day-long performance, and felt something crack inside my chest. Not my heart, exactly, but something close to it. Some illusion. I'd been carrying about what this day meant, what my role in my family was, what love was supposed to look like. "I need to start cleaning up," I said, because I couldn't stand the weight of Eleanor's pity or the truth in her questions. "Let me help you." "No." The word came out sharper than I'd intended. "I can handle it." Eleanor looked like she wanted to argue, but instead, she just nodded. "I'll be next door if you need anything. Anything at all." After she left, I stood alone in my living room, surveying the wreckage of my perfect Thanksgiving. Dirty dishes covered every surface, food was ground into the carpet, and the whole house smelled like the aftermath of a meal rather than the promise of one. I had spent $350 I couldn't afford. I had worked myself into exhaustion. I had used up every dish towel, every serving spoon, every ounce of energy I possessed. And for what? For 90 minutes of distracted conversation and perfunctory gratitude before everyone moved on to something better. As I began gathering plates and glasses, stacking them carefully for the long process of washing and drying and putting away, I tried to hold on to the good parts of the day, the initial excitement when people arrived, the compliments on the food, the brief moment when Marcus raised his toast and everyone seemed genuinely appreciative. But those moments felt thin and insubstantial compared to the weight of everything else. The preparation that had nearly broken me. The expense that would affect my budget for months. The realization that I had been performing rather than participating, serving rather than being served, giving rather than receiving. I thought about next year, about Marcus's casual suggestion that we make it bigger, invite more people, turn it into a real tradition. The idea made me feel sick. Was this my future? An annual performance where I exhausted myself to provide content for other people's social media posts and leftovers for their weekly meal planning? As I carried the first load of dishes to the kitchen, I caught sight of myself in the reflection of the window over the sink. I looked exactly like what I was, a tired old woman who had been used up and discarded, who had given everything she had and received polite appreciation in return. For the first time all day, I let myself acknowledge the truth that I'd been avoiding. This wasn't love. This wasn't family. This wasn't what I deserved after 73 years of putting everyone else's needs before my own. The dishes could wait. The cleanup could wait. Everything could wait while I figured out what I was going to do about the fact that the people I loved most in the world saw me as nothing more than a convenient caterer who worked for free. But as I stood there in my quiet kitchen, surrounded by the evidence of my misguided generosity, I had no idea that within hours, everything would change. I had no idea that my moment of clarity was about to become something much more powerful than a simple realization. I had no idea that sometimes the people who take advantage of you most are about to learn exactly what they've lost. I stood in my kitchen for what felt like hours, staring at the mountain of dirty dishes and feeling something dark and unfamiliar growing in my chest. It wasn't anger, exactly, though anger was part of it. It wasn't sadness, though there was plenty of that. Too, it was something deeper, more fundamental. A shift in the very foundation of how I saw myself and my place in my family's life. The cleanup took me until nearly midnight. Every dish had to be hand-washed because my ancient dishwasher couldn't handle the volume or the baked-on food. Every pot had to be scrubbed. Every serving platter dried and put away. Every surface wiped, down and sanitized. My hands were raw from the hot water and harsh detergent. My back screamed from bending over the sink for hours, and my feet were so swollen I could barely get my shoes off. But it wasn't the physical exhaustion that bothered me most. It was the silence. The absolute, deafening silence of a house that had been briefly filled with voices and laughter and was now empty again, as if none of it had ever happened. As if I had imagined the whole thing. I saved cleaning the dining room for last, partly because I was dreading it, and partly because I kept hoping someone might call. Not to help with the cleanup, necessarily, but just to check on me. To say thank you one more time. To acknowledge that I had given them something valuable and that they appreciated it. But my phone remained silent on the kitchen counter, as dark and lifeless as everything else in my house. When I finally tackled the dining room, I found evidence of just how little attention my guests had paid to the meal I'd spent days preparing. Napkins were crumpled and thrown on the floor. Someone had spilled gravy on my good tablecloth and hadn't bothered to mention it. There were actual footprints on the carpet where one of the children had apparently climbed under the table and tracked mud through the house. But it was the condition of the food itself that really broke my heart. So much of it had been wasted. Serving spoons left in dishes that were barely touched. Rolls broken apart and abandoned on plates. Someone had taken one bite of the vegetarian stuffing I'd spent hours making for Derek's girlfriend, and left the rest to congeal on their plate. As I scraped plate after plate of barely eaten food into the garbage, I tried to calculate how much money I was throwing away. Not just the cost of the ingredients, but my time, my energy, my hope that this would be something special and meaningful. $350 of groceries, 47 hours of preparation and cooking, 73 years of thinking that this was what love looked like, all of it garbage. I was wiping down the dining room table when I found Sarah's phone. She'd left it behind in her rush to get to the more important gathering at Jenny's house. The screen lit up when I picked it up, showing notification after notification from social media platforms I didn't recognize. I shouldn't have looked. I knew that even as I was doing it. But something compelled me to swipe the screen, to see what was so important that it had captured more of my daughter's attention than the meal I'd prepared for her. The phone opened to her Instagram account, and what I saw there made my blood turn cold. Photo after photo of my Thanksgiving table, my food, my house, but not just random snapshots. Carefully composed shots with professional-looking lighting and angles. Sarah had been documenting everything, turning my labor of love into content for her social media presence. The captions were what killed me. Thanksgiving goals. My sweet mom went all out this year. 20-plus dishes of pure comfort food heaven. Feeling so blessed to have a mom who loves us enough to spend days in the kitchen making magic happen. Family traditions never go out. Of style. 2,000 likes. Hundreds of comments about how lucky she was, how amazing the food looked, how blessed her family was to have such a dedicated grandmother. I scrolled through more posts, each one carefully crafted to present the perfect narrative of family love and gratitude. Photos of the elaborate table settings, close-ups of individual dishes, shots of Sarah posing with me that I barely remembered taking because I'd been so focused on getting the food ready. The spread is insane. Mom's been cooking. Since 3 a.m. and every single dish is perfection. This is what love looks like, people. 3 a.m. She'd mentioned that I'd been cooking since 3 in the morning, but not as a point of concern or gratitude. As a selling point for her online persona, proof of how extravagant and authentic her family experience was. But it was the last post that destroyed me completely. A photo of the wrapped leftovers, artfully arranged in containers with little handwritten labels. The caption read, "The best part of Mom's epic Thanksgiving, leftovers for days, already planning turkey sandwiches and leftover casseroles for the rest of the week. Who says you can't have Thanksgiving twice?" The comments were a chorus of envy and admiration. People praising Sarah for having such a wonderful mother, expressing jealousy over the abundance of food, asking for recipes and tips for hosting their own family gatherings. Not one comment mentioned that Sarah hadn't cooked a single dish. Not one acknowledged that the epic Thanksgiving had been entirely my work, my expense, my exhaustion. In Sarah's carefully curated version of events, she was the grateful daughter blessed with abundance, not the ungrateful child who had used her mother as unpaid catering staff. I set the phone down with shaking hands and sank into one of the dining room chairs that I hadn't had time to sit in during my own Thanksgiving dinner. The magnitude of what had happened was starting to hit me, and it felt like drowning in slow motion. This hadn't been about family time or tradition or love. This had been about content, about Sarah's need to present herself online as someone who had access to abundance and blessing, someone whose family life was worth envying. I had been a prop in her performance, a means to an end that had nothing to do with genuine appreciation or connection. I thought about all the phone calls leading up to today, all the specific requests and dietary requirements and last-minute additions. Had any of it been about wanting to spend time with me? Or had it all been about creating the most impressive spread possible for social media documentation? The more I thought about it, the clearer it became. The constant photo taking during dinner, the way everyone had documented their plates before eating, the rushed feeling of the meal itself, as if the actual eating was less important than the appearance of abundance. They hadn't come to share a meal with me. They'd come to harvest content from my labor. I looked around my empty dining room, at the ghost imprints on the carpet where extra tables had been set up, at the water stains on my good furniture where people had set drinks without using coasters. This room had been the center of so many real family gatherings when Robert was alive, when the children were young, when people came because they wanted to be together rather than because they wanted something from each other. When had I become so desperate for their attention that I was willing to accept this pale imitation of love? The phone buzzed with a text message, and for a moment my heart leaped with the hope that someone was checking on me. But it was just Sarah's husband, Marcus, asking if she'd left her phone at my house. I stared at the message for a long time, debating whether to respond immediately or wait until morning. In the end, I typed back a simple, "Yes, she can pick it up tomorrow," and then turned the phone face down on the table. Tomorrow. They'd expect me to be available tomorrow too, to hand over the phone whenever it was convenient for them to stop. Bye. Just like they'd expected me to be available today for their Thanksgiving performance. Just like they expected me to always be available, always accommodating, always grateful for whatever scraps of attention they were willing to throw my way. I went to bed that night with my whole body aching and my mind racing. I kept replaying moments from the dinner, looking for signs I'd missed, evidence of genuine appreciation that I'd overlooked in my disappointment. But the more I thought about it, the more convinced I became that I'd been played. The expensive wine glasses for Marcus's bottles that he'd brought but never opened. The special dietary accommodations for people who'd barely touched the modified dishes. The extra place setting for Ruth, who'd eaten a few bites and left after an hour. Everything had been about the appearance of thoughtfulness and abundance, not the reality of it. I woke up the next morning feeling like I'd been hit by a truck. Every muscle ached, my hands were still raw from the dishwater, and my head pounded with the kind of exhaustion that sleep doesn't cure. But worse than the physical pain was the emotional heaviness that settled over me like a fog. This was my life. This was what I'd accepted as normal, as love, as the natural order of things. I gave and gave and gave, and in return, I received polite appreciation and social media content, and the privilege of being included in gatherings where I did all the work. The phone rang at 9 a.m., and I knew without looking that it would be Sarah, probably calling about her phone, but also probably expecting me to be cheerful and grateful about yesterday's success. "Hi, Mom. I hope I didn't wake you. Did you sleep? Well, after all that excitement yesterday?" Excitement. She called it excitement, as if it had been fun for me instead of exhausting. "I slept fine, thank you." "Great. Listen, I think I left my phone at your house. I've been going crazy without it. Could I swing by and pick it up sometime today?" "Of course. It's here whenever you want to get it." "Perfect. I'll probably come by around noon if that works. For you." "Oh, and Mom?" I just wanted to say again how absolutely incredible yesterday was. Everyone is still talking about it. Marcus's mom called this morning just to rave about your cooking, and my Instagram post got over 3,000 likes. People are so impressed by what you accomplished. 3,000 likes. She was proud of the social media engagement she'd gotten from my work, not the work itself. "That's nice, dear. Are you feeling okay? You sound a little off." Off. I was feeling off because I'd finally seen clearly what my place in my family really was, and it wasn't the place I'd thought I occupied. Just tired. It was a long day yesterday. Of course it was, but so worth it, right? I mean, days like yesterday are what make all the effort worthwhile. Creating memories, bringing family together, continuing traditions. It's priceless. Priceless. Except it had cost me $350, 2 weeks of preparation, and whatever remained of my illusions about my relationship with my children. After I hung up, I sat in my quiet kitchen and tried to figure out what I was feeling. Anger was part of it, but there was something else too. Something that felt almost like relief, as if a weight I hadn't realized I was carrying had finally been lifted. I'd been performing for so long that I'd forgotten what it felt like to just exist without constantly trying to prove my worth through service and sacrifice. I'd been so focused on being needed that I'd lost sight of whether I was actually valued. The difference was important. Being needed meant people expected things from you. Being valued meant people appreciated you for who you were, not just what you could do for them. For the first time in years, maybe decades, I started thinking about what I wanted instead of what everyone else needed from me. What did I want? What would make me happy? What would make me feel fulfilled and appreciated and valued for the right reasons? The answers surprised me with their simplicity. I wanted relationships where the giving and taking was mutual. I wanted to feel like my time and energy were precious rather than infinite. I wanted to matter to people when I wasn't actively doing something for them. But most of all, I wanted to stop being taken for granted. As I sat there in my kitchen, still surrounded by the lingering smells of yesterday's feast, I felt something shifting inside me. Something that had been dormant for so long I'd forgotten it existed. It was power. Not the power to serve others, but the power to choose how I wanted to be treated. I thought about Eleanor's questions from the night before. When was the last time someone had cooked for me? When was the last time someone had gone out of their way to make my life easier, rather than expecting me to make theirs easier? The answers were depressing, but they were also clarifying. If I wanted to be treated differently, I was going to have to teach people how to treat me differently. And that meant making some changes that wouldn't be comfortable for anyone, including myself. I picked up Sarah's phone from where I'd left it on the dining room table and scrolled through her Instagram posts one more time. All those photos of my food, my table, my work, all those comments praising her for being blessed with such a wonderful mother, all that social media validation built on my invisible labor. But as I looked at the posts more carefully, I noticed something I'd missed the night before. The timestamp on the first post showed that Sarah had uploaded it while she was still sitting at my table. While I was running back and forth to the kitchen, serving and clearing and making sure everyone had what they needed, she'd been composing captions and selecting filters and building her online brand on the foundation of my exhaustion. That's when I knew exactly what I was going to do. I opened my laptop and created my own social media account. I'd never had much interest in Instagram or Facebook or any of the platforms my children were always talking about, but suddenly I understood their power. These platforms weren't just about sharing photos. They were about controlling narratives, about deciding which version of reality got presented to the world. For too long, other people had been telling my story. It was time I started telling it myself. I spent the morning learning how to use the platform, figuring out filters and hashtags, and all the technical aspects that Sarah took for granted. But more importantly, I spent time thinking about what story I wanted to tell, what narrative I wanted to present about my life and my relationships, and my worth as a human being. By the time Sarah arrived at noon to collect her phone, I was ready. She came through the front door like she owned the place, chattering about her morning and how many people had commented on her posts and how Marcus's mother was still raving about the meal to everyone she knew. "Mom, you're famous," she said, laughing as she scrolled through her notifications. "I've never gotten this much engagement on a post before. People are seriously impressed by what you pulled off yesterday." What I pulled off, as if it had been a magic trick rather than days of hard work. I handed her the phone without comment, and she immediately became absorbed in responding to messages and comments, her attention shifting away from me to her digital life as seamlessly as it had shifted away from my dinner table to Jenny's dessert gathering. "Oh, this is funny," she said, not looking up from her screen. "Someone asked if you do catering. I told them you're just naturally gifted at this stuff, that it comes easily to you. Isn't that sweet?" Comes easily to you. 3 days of preparation, 11 hours of cooking, $350 of expenses, and it came easily to me. "Mom, did you hear me?" "I heard you." She finally looked up from her phone, perhaps sensing something different in my tone. "Are you sure you're okay? You seem really quiet today." I'm fine, Sarah. Just thinking. About what? I looked at my daughter, this 45-year-old woman who still somehow expected me to manage her emotions and smooth over any discomfort she might experience. This successful professional who couldn't conceive of a world where her mother might have needs or feelings or limits that conflicted with her convenience. About next year, I said simply. Next year? Oh, you mean Thanksgiving. Marcus was serious. About making it even bigger, you know? He was thinking we could invite some of our friends, maybe make it a real community gathering. Wouldn't that be amazing? Amazing. More people to cook for, more expenses to absorb, more work to do, more content for other people to harvest from my labor. I'm sure it would be quite something, I said. Sarah looked pleased by what she interpreted as enthusiasm. I knew you'd love the idea. You're so good at this stuff, Mom. It's like you were born to create these special experiences for people. Born to create experiences for other people. Born to serve. Born to sacrifice, born to give until there was nothing left to give. Well, I said carefully, we'll see what next year brings. After Sarah left, I went back to my laptop and continued working on my new social media presence. I had a story to tell, and for the first time in my life, I was going to tell it my way, but I wasn't going to tell it alone. I had a feeling that once people heard the real story behind those beautiful Instagram photos, once they understood what comes easily actually looked like, the conversation around my Thanksgiving feast was going to change dramatically, and so was everything else. It took me 3 days to craft the perfect post. 3 days of writing and rewriting, of choosing the right photos, of finding the courage to tell a truth that would change everything. I'd never realized how much power there was in controlling your own narrative until I sat down to reclaim mine. The photo I chose was one Sarah had taken of me in the kitchen, though she'd never posted it. I was standing at the stove at 6 a.m, my hair disheveled, my face exhausted, stirring gravy with one hand while checking the oven temperature with the other. In the background, you could see the chaos of preparation. Dirty dishes, stacked everywhere, ingredient containers scattered across every surface, the evidence of hours of relentless work. It wasn't a pretty picture. It wasn't Instagram-worthy. It was real. I created my account under the name Our Real Grandma Norma and wrote my caption carefully, choosing each word for maximum impact. This is what effortless family cooking actually looks like. This photo was taken at 6 a.m. on Thanksgiving morning, hour 3 of my 11-hour cooking marathon. By the time this day was over, I had prepared 20 dishes for 28 people, spent $350 of my fixed income, and worked myself into complete exhaustion. The blessed family gathering lasted exactly 90 minutes before everyone left for a more important party elsewhere. But don't worry, my daughter got over 3,000 likes on Instagram for showcasing my natural gift for creating magical family experiences. Some gifts cost more than others. I added hashtags that I'd researched carefully. Elder abuse, family exploitation, truth-telling, unpaid labor, real talk, grandma story, behind the scenes, toxic family, setting boundaries, enough is enough. Then I hit publish and waited. The response was immediate and overwhelming. Within an hour, my post had been shared dozens of times. Within 6 hours, hundreds of times. By the end of the day, thousands of people were commenting, sharing their own stories of family exploitation, expressing outrage at my situation, and demanding justice. But the real explosion came when someone found Sarah's original Instagram post and shared it alongside mine, creating a split-screen comparison between her curated version of events and my raw reality. The contrast was devastating. Sarah's beautiful, abundant table next to my exhausted face in the kitchen at dawn. Her grateful captions about being blessed next to my itemized breakdown of what that blessing actually cost. The internet can be a cruel place, but it can also be a place where truth finds its voice. My story resonated with thousands of people who had their own experiences of being taken advantage of by family members, of giving until they had nothing left, of being appreciated only for what they could provide rather than who they were. The why. Comments on my post were a mixture of support, outrage, and recognition. Women my age shared stories of adult children who expected endless service without reciprocation. Younger people expressed shock at how their own families might be exploiting their elders without realizing it. Everyone seemed to understand that this wasn't just about one Thanksgiving dinner. It was about a pattern of behavior that treated certain family members as unpaid servants rather than beloved relatives. But it was the private messages that really got to me. Dozens, then hundreds of people reaching out to tell me their own stories, to thank me for giving voice to something they'd experienced but never been able to articulate. A 70-year-old woman in Texas who'd been cooking Christmas dinner for 40 people every year, while her wealthy children split the bill at expensive restaurants the rest of the holiday season. A grandmother in Ohio whose daughter-in-law expected free babysitting 3 days a week, but never included her in family vacations or celebrations. An elderly man whose adult children only called when they needed money, but were always too busy to visit. I wasn't alone. I wasn't the only one who'd been caught in this trap of thinking that love meant endless giving without any expectation of reciprocity. On the second day after my post went viral, Sarah called. I let it go to voicemail, then listened to her message while staring out my kitchen window at Eleanor's house, where warm light glowed in every window and her family gathered for their own quiet dinners that didn't require anyone to work themselves into collapse. Mom, I don't understand what's happening. People are saying horrible things about me online and I can't figure out why. Someone sent me a link to some Instagram account that's posting pictures of our Thanksgiving and making it sound like we did something wrong. It doesn't even make sense. We had such a wonderful day together, and everyone was so grateful for everything you did. Can you call me back? I'm really upset about this. She was upset, not concerned about me, not apologetic for how I'd been treated, but upset that her carefully crafted online image was being challenged by an inconvenient truth. I didn't call her back. On the third day, the story had spread beyond social media. A local news station picked it up, then a regional paper, then a national website that specialized in viral stories. My phone rang constantly with interview requests, reporters wanting to know more about the Thanksgiving exploitation story that's breaking the internet. I turned them all down. This wasn't about becoming famous or getting attention for myself. This was about setting the record straight and, more importantly, setting boundaries that should have been set decades ago. But I did accept one interview request from a podcast that focused on elder rights and family dynamics. The host, a social worker named Maria Santos, had reached out with questions that showed she understood the deeper issues at play. Norma, she said during our recorded conversation, your story has clearly struck a nerve with people. What do you think that says about how we treat our elders and families? I'd had time to think about this, time to move beyond my personal situation to the broader patterns it represented. I think we've created a culture where certain people, usually women and especially older women, are expected to give endlessly without receiving anything meaningful in return. We're supposed to be grateful for being included, grateful for being needed, grateful for the opportunity to serve. But gratitude without reciprocity isn't love. It's exploitation. You've been criticized online by some people who say that cooking for family is a normal expression of love, that you're being dramatic about what sounds like a typical family gathering. How do you respond to that? I'd say they're missing the point entirely. Cooking for family can absolutely be an expression of love. When it's mutual, when it's appreciated in meaningful ways, when the person doing the cooking is also cared for and considered. But when one person does all the work, pays all the expenses, exhausts themselves in service of others who can't even be bothered to stay for dessert, that's not love. That's unpaid labor disguised as family obligation. What do you want people to take away from your story? I thought about all the messages I'd received, all the people who'd told me they saw themselves in my situation. I want them to know that they have the right to be valued for who they are, not just what they can do. I want them to understand that setting boundaries isn't selfish. It's necessary for any healthy relationship. And I want them to look closely at their own family dynamics and ask themselves whether they're truly giving and receiving love, or whether someone is being taken advantage of. The podcast episode was downloaded over 1 million times in its first week. My story had touched something deep in the collective consciousness, something about the way we treat the people who love us most, the way we take for granted the sacrifices others make for our comfort and convenience. But the real turning point came when Sarah showed up at my house unannounced, her face red with anger and embarrassment. "Mom, you have to stop this," she said, before I'd even fully opened the door. "Do you have any idea what you've done? People at work are asking me about it. Emma's friends are sharing those horrible posts. Marcus's mother won't even speak to me because she thinks I'm some kind of monster who abuses her elderly mother." I stepped aside to let her in, noting that her first concern was still her own reputation rather than my feelings or well-being. "Hello, Sarah. Please, come in." "Don't hello Sarah me like nothing's wrong. You've completely humiliated me in front of the entire internet. People are calling me an ungrateful daughter, saying I'm selfish and terrible. There are memes, Mom. Actual memes making fun of me." I led her to the living room and sat down in my favorite chair, the one Robert used to read his newspaper in. Every evening. "I'm sorry you're experiencing consequences for your actions, but I'm not sorry for telling the truth about my experience." "Your experience? We had a wonderful Thanksgiving together. Everyone loved the food, everyone was grateful, everyone had a great time. I don't understand why you're making it sound like we tortured you or something." "Did you have a great time?" "Sarah." "Of course I did. It was exactly what I wanted. A traditional family gathering with amazing food and everyone together." "And after you got what you wanted, what happened?" She looked confused by the question. "What do you mean?" "I mean after you took your photos and got your social media content and filled your containers with leftovers, what happened to the person who made it all possible?" You cleaned up. Like always." I cleaned up alone. After working for 11 hours straight. After spending money I couldn't afford. After exhausting myself to give you exactly what you wanted. And not one of you offered to help, or stayed to keep me company, or seemed to consider that I might be tired or need support. Sarah shifted uncomfortably in her chair. "We offered to help with cleanup. You said you had it handled. When? When exactly did anyone offer to help?" She opened her mouth to answer, then closed it, her face showing the first flicker of uncertainty I'd seen since she'd arrived. "And even if someone had offered," I continued, "why was cleanup the only help that occurred to anyone? Why didn't anyone offer to bring a dish or contribute more significantly to the cost, or come early to help with preparation? Why was the only assistance anyone thought to offer the bare minimum required to salve their own consciences?" "Mom, we always assumed you enjoyed doing it. You never complained. You always seemed happy to cook for everyone." "I was happy to cook for everyone when everyone was happy to be with me. But yesterday wasn't about being together, was it? It was about getting what you wanted from me as efficiently as possible before moving on to something better." The silence stretched between us, heavy with truths that neither of us had wanted to acknowledge. I could see Sarah processing what I was saying, perhaps for the first time really considering how our family dynamics had evolved over the years. "The Instagram posts," I said quietly. "They told me everything I needed to know about what yesterday meant to you. You documented my work like it was a tourist attraction. You presented my exhaustion as evidence of your good fortune. You got thousands of likes for other people's admiration of what you never bothered to truly appreciate yourself." Tears started. forming in Sarah's eyes, and for a moment I felt the old instinct to comfort her, to make her feel better, to put her emotions ahead of my own needs. But I forced myself to stay seated, to let her sit with the discomfort of what she was hearing. "I didn't mean for it to be like that," she said finally. I thought you liked being needed. I thought it made you feel important and useful. Being used isn't the same as being valued, Sarah. Being needed isn't the same as being loved. And performing for other people's social media isn't the same as sharing meaningful time together." She was crying now, and I could see the little girl she used to be, the one who would run to me for comfort whenever the world felt too big or scary or confusing. But she wasn't a little girl anymore, and the hurt she was feeling now was the consequence of choices she'd made as an adult. "What do you want me to do?" she asked. "How do I fix this?" It was the right question, finally. Not how to make the internet stop talking about her, or how to repair her damaged reputation, but how to actually address the underlying problem. "I want you to understand that I'm not your personal caterer," I said. "I'm not your content creator. I'm not your unpaid staff. I'm your mother, and I deserve to be treated with the same consideration and respect you'd show any other person you claim to love." "Of course you do. I never meant to." "What you meant isn't as important as what you did. And what you did was take advantage of someone who loves you, someone who would do anything for you, someone who has spent her entire adult life putting your needs ahead of her own." Sarah wiped her eyes with the back of her hand, and I could see her struggling to understand how we'd gotten to this point. "So, what happens now? How do we move forward?" "That depends on whether you're willing to change how you treat me. Whether you're willing to see me as a person with my own needs and limits, rather than as a resource to be utilized for your convenience. I want to change. I want to do better. But I don't know how." For the first time since she'd arrived, I felt a flicker of hope. Admitting ignorance was the first step toward learning, and learning was the first step toward genuine change. You start by asking yourself what you're bringing to our relationship instead of just what you're getting from it, I said. You start by considering my needs and preferences and limitations before making plans that affect me. You start by treating my time and energy as valuable instead of infinite. What about Thanksgiving next year? Marcus was serious about making it bigger. I looked at my daughter, this woman who had benefited from my labor for so many years, without ever stopping to consider what it cost me. "Next year, if you want a big family gathering, you'll need to figure out how to create it without expecting me to do all the work. Maybe you host it at your house. Maybe everyone contributes, dishes and expenses. Maybe you hire actual caterers. But whatever you decide, it won't be my responsibility to exhaust myself for your convenience." The conversation continued for another hour, with Sarah asking questions and me explaining boundaries I should have set years ago. It wasn't easy for either of us. She had to confront the reality that she'd been behaving in ways that were selfish and thoughtless. I had to maintain my resolve in the face of her tears and confusion and genuine desire to do better. But it was necessary. Long overdue, but necessary. After Sarah left, I felt lighter than I had in years. Not because I'd hurt my daughter or enjoyed her distress, but because I'd finally spoken truths that needed to be spoken. I'd finally stood up for myself in a way that I should have done decades ago. Over the following weeks, the response to my story continued to evolve. Other family members called, some supportive, some defensive, some confused about why I was making such a big deal about what they saw as normal family dynamics. Michael, my son, was initially angry that I'd aired dirty laundry publicly, but after several long conversations, he began to understand that the laundry had been dirty for a long time, and that pretending otherwise hadn't made it clean. But the most meaningful responses came from strangers who reached out to thank me for giving them permission to set their own boundaries, to value their own time and energy, to expect reciprocity in their relationships. I received hundreds of messages from people who said my story had inspired them to have difficult conversations with their own families, to stop accepting treatment that made them feel used and undervalued. A woman in Arizona wrote to tell me that she'd stopped hosting her weekly family dinners until her adult children agreed to share the cooking and cleaning responsibilities. A grandfather in Maine said he'd started charging his daughter for babysitting after years of providing free childcare while she spent money on luxury vacations. A widow in Florida decided to sell her large house and move into a retirement community where she could make friends who valued her for herself rather than for what she could provide. My story had become bigger than just my family, bigger than just one Thanksgiving dinner. It had become a catalyst for conversations about respect, reciprocity, and the difference between love and exploitation. 3 months later, Sarah called to tell me about the Thanksgiving plans she was making for the following year. She'd decided to host it at her house, with each family bringing specific dishes and contributing to shared expenses. She'd hired a cleaning service to handle the aftermath. And she'd planned the gathering to last all day, with activities and conversation spaces designed to encourage genuine connection rather than just efficient consumption. "I want to do this right," she said. "I want it to be about actually spending time together, not about creating content or getting what we want from each other." "That sounds wonderful," I said, and I meant it. "Will you come? I know I don't deserve your forgiveness yet, but I'm hoping you'll give me a chance to show you that I'm learning." I thought about it for a moment, considering not just what I wanted, but what would be healthiest for both of us. "I'll come on one condition: anything. No phones at the table, no social media posts during the meal. If you want to take a few pictures afterward for memories, that's fine. But the focus should be on being present with each other, not on documenting the experience for other people." "Deal. Absolutely." As I hung up the phone, I looked around my quiet house and felt something I hadn't experienced in years: contentment. Not the frantic satisfaction of having successfully served others, but the deep peace of knowing that I was valued for who I was rather than what I could do. Eleanor knocked on my door that evening, carrying a bottle of wine and wearing the kind of smile that suggested she had something to celebrate. "I brought champagne," she announced as she let herself in. "We're toasting your newfound fame and the fact that you've single-handedly started a revolution in family dynamics." "I didn't start a revolution," I protested, though I was smiling as I said it. "I just told the truth about one dinner. One dinner that represented decades of taking you for granted. One dinner that perfectly illustrated how we treat the people who love us most. One dinner that showed the difference between being appreciated and being exploited." We sat in my living room, sipping champagne and talking about how strange it felt to be recognized for speaking up, rather than for keeping quiet, for setting boundaries rather than for endless accommodation. "Do you ever regret it?" Eleanor asked. "Going public, I mean. Making it all so visible." I considered the question seriously. There had been difficult moments, conversations with family members who didn't understand, criticism from people who thought I was being ungrateful or dramatic, the strange experience of having strangers know intimate details about my life. But there had also been unexpected gifts, messages from people who felt less alone in their own struggles, the knowledge that my experience had helped others recognize and address their own situations, the profound relief of finally living authentically, instead of performing constantly. Most importantly, there was the slow but genuine change I was seeing in my relationships with my children. Not just Sarah, but Michael too, who had started calling more often just to talk, who had recently invited me to dinner at his house for no special occasion, who seemed to be learning to value my company rather than just my services. "No," I said finally. "I don't regret it. For the first time in my adult life, I feel like people see me for who I really am instead of who they need me to be. That's worth any temporary discomfort." Eleanor raised her glass. "To Norma Jackson, who reminded the world that grandmothers are people too." "To learning the difference between love and performance," I countered. We clinked glasses and drank to new beginnings, to the power of truth-telling, and to the revolutionary idea that everyone deserves to be valued for who they are rather than what they can provide. 6 months later, I received an email from a publishing company asking if I'd be interested in writing a book about my experience. They'd seen the ongoing conversation my story had generated and thought there might be an audience for a deeper exploration of family dynamics, elder care, and the importance of reciprocity in relationships. I said yes. Not because I wanted to, be famous or make money, but because I'd learned that sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is tell your truth and trust that it will resonate with people who need to hear it. Sometimes the most loving thing you can do is refuse to accept treatment that diminishes your worth. Sometimes the most important gift you can give your family is teaching them how to love you better. My story didn't end with that one Thanksgiving dinner, but it began there. It began with the realization that I deserved better than what I was accepting, that love should enhance rather than exhaust, that being valued means being seen as a whole person, rather than just a source of service. And maybe, just maybe, that lesson was worth all the turkey and stuffing and mashed potatoes in the world. Writing this story has been both the most difficult and most liberating experience of my 74 years. When I first sat down at my laptop that cold November morning, hands still aching from washing dishes until midnight, I had no idea that sharing my truth would create waves that reached far beyond my own small kitchen in Ohio. The book deal came through 8 months after my story went viral, and I spent the better part of a year interviewing women and men across the country who had reached out to share their own experiences of family exploitation. What I discovered was both heartbreaking and hopeful. Heartbreaking because so many people were living variations of my story. Hopeful because awareness was the first step toward change. Margaret from Portland told me about 30 years of hosting Christmas Eve dinner for 43 relatives, including her ex-husband's new family, while battling rheumatoid arthritis and living on disability payments. She'd never missed a year, never asked for help, never complained, until she read my story and realized she had the right to say no. James from Alabama had been providing free lawn care, home repairs, and financial support to his 3 adult children while they took expensive vacations and bought luxury cars they couldn't afford. He'd thought he was being a good father until he understood the difference between helping and enabling, between love and exploitation. Carmen from Texas had raised her grandchildren for 12 years, while their parents pursued careers and social lives, never receiving child support or even consistent acknowledgement of her sacrifice. She'd believed it was her duty as a grandmother, until she recognized that duty should flow both ways. Their stories, and hundreds of others like them, confirmed what I'd suspected. My Thanksgiving dinner was just one example of a much larger pattern in our society, where certain people, usually women, often elders, are expected to give endlessly without receiving meaningful support in return. But the responses I received weren't just stories of exploitation. They were also stories of transformation. People who had read my account and decided to make changes in their own lives, to set boundaries they'd never thought they had the right to establish. The grandmother in Michigan who started charging her daughter-in-law for babysitting services and used the money to take her first vacation in 15 years. The elderly father in Nevada who sold his large family home and moved into a retirement community instead of continuing to host every holiday while his children criticized his cooking and left him with the cleanup. The widow in South Carolina who stopped doing her adult son's laundry and meal prep, forcing him to finally learn basic life skills at age 42. Each story reinforced the same fundamental truth. Respect is not automatic in families. It has to be modeled, expected, and sometimes demanded. The media attention was overwhelming at first. I appeared on 3 national television shows, gave interviews to countless newspapers and magazines, and spoke at conferences about elder rights and family dynamics. Every platform gave me the opportunity to emphasize the same message. Love without reciprocity is not sustainable, and family relationships require the same consideration and respect as any other meaningful connection. But perhaps the most meaningful response came from an unexpected source: young adults who saw my story and recognized their own behavior patterns. College students who realized they'd been taking advantage of their parents' generosity. Young professionals who understood they'd been treating their grandparents like free childcare services rather than valued family members. Recent graduates who acknowledged they'd been using their childhood homes like hotels while contributing nothing to household expenses or maintenance. I received a particularly touching letter from a 25-year-old woman named Jessica, who wrote, "Your story made me realize that I've been treating my mom like an unpaid personal assistant for years. I call her when I need something: advice, money, emotional support, help with errands. But I can't remember the last time I called just to see how she was doing or to offer help with something she needed. I always assumed that was just what moms were for. But your story helped me understand that moms are people too, with their own needs and limitations and the right to be valued for who they are, not just what they can do for their children." Jessica's letter represented something I hadn't expected when I first shared my story: the possibility that younger generations could learn to do better before falling into the same patterns of exploitation that had defined so many family relationships for so long. The changes in my own family have been gradual but genuine. Sarah's transformation didn't happen overnight. It took months of difficult conversations, boundary setting, and consistent enforcement of new expectations. There were setbacks and moments of frustration on both sides as we learned to relate to each other as equals rather than as service provider and beneficiary. But the effort was worth it. Our relationship now has a depth and authenticity it never had before. When Sarah calls, I know it's because she wants to talk to me, not because she needs something from me. When we spend time together, it's about mutual enjoyment rather than my performance of grandmother duties. When she expresses gratitude, it comes with actions that demonstrate genuine appreciation rather than empty words followed by additional requests. The planning for our second Thanksgiving together, the first one after my viral moment, was a revelation in itself. Sarah insisted on hosting, created a detailed plan for shared responsibilities, and sent everyone a clear message about expectations for participation and behavior. No phones during dinner, no social media posts without everyone's consent, no early departures without genuine emergencies. When I arrived at her house that Thursday morning, I found a kitchen full of family members actually working together. Michael was making his grandmother's famous cornbread recipe, which he'd finally taken the time to learn properly. Lisa was teaching the teenagers how to prepare vegetables while sharing stories about her own grandmother's cooking. Marcus's parents had brought their traditional family dishes and were sharing the recipes with anyone who wanted them. For the first time in decades, I was a guest at a family gathering rather than the unpaid staff. I sat in a comfortable chair in the living room, drinking coffee and watching football with the other adults while the cooking happened around me. When someone needed help, multiple people volunteered. When it was time to set the table, everyone participated. When dinner was served, it was a collaborative effort rather than a solo performance. The meal itself lasted 3 hours, not because the food took longer to eat, but because people lingered at the table, talking and laughing and actually enjoying each other's company. There were no rushed goodbyes or urgent departures for better parties elsewhere. There were no phones interrupting conversations or cameras documenting every bite for social media posterity. When it came time for cleanup, I started to stand up out of habit, but Sarah gently pushed me back into my chair. "You're retired from cleanup duty," she said firmly. "That's what the rest of us are here for." Watching my family work together to restore the kitchen while I relaxed with a cup of coffee and a slice of pie was one of the most profound experiences of my life. Not because I was being lazy or avoiding responsibility, but because I was finally being treated like a valued family member rather than hired help. The book I eventually wrote, titled The Last Thanksgiving, A Grandmother's Guide to Family Boundaries, became a bestseller within 6 months of publication. Publishers Weekly called it a powerful exploration of family dynamics and self-worth that will resonate with anyone who has ever felt taken for granted by the people they love most. But the real measure of the book's impact wasn't sales figures or reviews. It was the letters and emails I received from readers who had used my story as a catalyst for change in their own lives. Support groups formed around the country for people dealing with family exploitation. Therapists began recommending the book to clients struggling with boundary setting in family relationships. Social workers started using it as a resource for elder advocacy. A particularly gratifying development was the creation of reciprocity Thanksgiving movements in several cities, where community organizations hosted holiday gatherings specifically designed around mutual contribution and shared responsibility. Everyone who attended brought something: food, decorations, entertainment, or cleanup help, and no one person was expected to carry the entire burden of creating the experience. These gatherings weren't just about the holidays. They were about modeling healthier ways of building community and family connections. They demonstrated that abundance and joy could be created collectively, that no one person needed to exhaust themselves for everyone else's benefit. The speaking engagements that followed the book's publication took me to conferences, universities, and community centers across the country. I spoke to audiences of social workers, family therapists, elder care advocates, and ordinary people who were struggling with family dynamics that felt unsustainable. My message was always the same: healthy relationships require reciprocity, respect, and recognition of each person's inherent worth. Family connections should enhance your life, not drain it. Love should feel nourishing, not exhausting. But I also emphasized that change was possible at any stage of life, that it was never too late to set boundaries, never too late to demand better treatment, never too late to teach people how to love you properly. Some of the most inspiring stories I heard came from people in their 80s and 90s who had finally found the courage to stop accepting unacceptable behavior from their adult children. One woman in her 80s told me she'd stopped hosting family gatherings entirely until her children agreed to share the responsibilities and expenses. Another elderly gentleman said he'd moved into senior living specifically to force his adult children to visit him for his company rather than his services. A 90-year-old great-grandmother had started charging her family for the quilts she made, turning her lifelong hobby into a small business that finally gave her some financial independence from her children's grudging support. Their courage inspired me to continue speaking out, to keep pushing the conversation forward, to challenge the cultural assumptions that make exploitation possible in the first place. One of the most important realizations that came from my research and speaking was understanding how gender and age intersect to create vulnerability to family exploitation. The vast majority of people who reached out to me were women, particularly older women who had been socialized to believe that their value came from their service to others. We'd been taught that good mothers, wives, and grandmothers were selfless, that putting others' needs first was not just expected, but virtuous. We'd learned to measure our worth by how much we could give, how many people we could please, how many problems we could solve for others. But we'd never been taught that healthy relationships require balance, that love should flow in multiple directions, that our own needs and well-being mattered as much as anyone else's. The cultural messages were reinforced everywhere, in greeting cards that praised mothers for their endless sacrifice, in social media posts that celebrated grandmothers who did everything for their families, in family traditions that expected certain people to carry the entire burden of creating holiday magic. My story had struck such a nerve because it challenged these fundamental assumptions about family roles and responsibilities. It suggested that maybe the grandmother who cooked for 28 people wasn't blessed with a gift for hospitality. Maybe she was being exploited by people who had learned to take her labor for granted. The response from mental health professionals was particularly encouraging. Therapists began reaching out to tell me they were using my story in their practice, helping clients recognize patterns of exploitation in their own families and develop strategies for setting healthier boundaries. Dr. Rebecca Martinez, a family therapist in California, wrote to tell me that my book had become required reading for her clients who were struggling with what she called caregiver burnout in family systems. She explained that many people, particularly women, came to therapy feeling guilty about being exhausted by their family responsibilities, but unable to articulate why. Your story gives them permission to acknowledge that they're being taken advantage of, she wrote. It helps them understand that feeling used isn't a character flaw. It's a natural response to being in an unbalanced relationship. And it shows them that change is possible, even in long-established family patterns. The validation from mental health professionals meant more to me than any bestseller list or media coverage. It confirmed that my experience wasn't just personal drama. It was part of a larger pattern that affected thousands of families and millions of individuals. 2 years after my story first went viral, I received an invitation that surprised me more than any other response. Sarah asked me to speak at her company's Women's Leadership Conference about setting boundaries and advocating for yourself in professional relationships. The irony wasn't lost on either of us. The daughter who had once exploited my boundaries was now asking me to teach other women how to establish and maintain their own. But it also represented the depth of her transformation and her genuine commitment to spreading the lessons she'd learned from our difficult journey. Speaking to that room full of professional women about the skills I'd developed at 73, assertiveness, boundary setting, self-advocacy, felt like completing a circle. Many of these women were dealing with workplace dynamics that mirrored family exploitation, being expected to take on extra responsibilities without additional compensation, having their time and energy treated as infinite resources, being praised for their natural ability to handle impossible workloads. The questions they asked were familiar. How do you say no without seeming ungrateful? How do you set limits without damaging relationships? How do you advocate for yourself when you've been taught that selflessness is a virtue? My answers were the same ones I'd learned through necessity. You start by recognizing that your needs matter. You practice saying no to small requests so you're prepared for bigger ones. You surround yourself with people who support your right to boundaries, rather than those who benefit from your lack of them. But most importantly, you remember that healthy relationships can withstand boundary setting, and unhealthy ones can't. If someone responds to your reasonable limits with anger, manipulation, or withdrawal, they're telling you everything you need to know about their priorities. The most unexpected gift of this entire experience has been the community I've found among people who understand the importance of reciprocity in relationships. Through speaking engagements, book signings, and social media connections, I've met hundreds of people who have become genuine friends rather than just acquaintances or fans. Eleanor and I started a monthly support group in our town for people dealing with family boundary issues. What began as a small gathering in my living room has grown into a registered nonprofit organization that provides resources, education, and advocacy for people struggling with family exploitation. We call it the Reciprocity Project, and our mission is simple: to help people recognize the difference between healthy family support and unsustainable exploitation, and to provide tools for creating more balanced relationships. The group includes people of all ages dealing with various forms of family boundary issues. Adult children who are finally learning to say no to parents who demand endless financial support. Grandparents who are setting limits on free childcare services. Siblings who are refusing to be the designated family crisis managers. Spouses who are no longer accepting responsibility for their partner's emotional regulation. What unites us all is the recognition that love should feel good, that healthy relationships require mutual respect and consideration, and that everyone deserves to be valued for who they are, rather than what they can provide. On my 75th birthday, my family threw me a party that perfectly demonstrated how much our relationships had changed. Instead of expecting me to plan and host my own celebration, Sarah and Michael coordinated everything themselves. They rented a community center, hired caterers, and invited friends and family members who wanted to celebrate me rather than be served by me. The evening was filled with speeches about my advocacy work, my writing, and my impact on other people's lives. But the moment that meant the most to me was when my teenage granddaughter Emma stood up to make a toast. "I want to thank my grandma," she said, "not just for all the amazing things she's done for our family over the years, but for teaching us how to do better." Before her story went viral, I didn't really understand that grandparents were real people, with their own feelings and needs and lives. I just thought of Grandma as someone who existed to make holidays special and listen to our problems and always be available when we needed something. But watching her set boundaries and demand respect taught me something really important. That love isn't about one person giving everything and everyone else taking whatever they want. Real love is about caring for each other, supporting each other, and making sure everyone feels valued and appreciated. So thank you, Grandma, for showing us what it looks like to love ourselves enough to expect better treatment. Thank you for teaching us that family members should build each other up, not wear each other down. And thank you for proving that it's never too late to change, to grow, and to demand the respect you deserve. As I listened to Emma's words, I realized that the most important impact of my story might not be the people it helped in my generation, but the young adults it taught to approach relationships differently from the beginning. Emma and her brother, Josh, now understand that healthy families operate on principles of mutual support and shared responsibility. They've learned to recognize exploitation before accepting it as normal. They've been taught to value the people who love them rather than taking their generosity for granted. The ripple effects of one grandmother's refusal to accept unacceptable treatment will continue long after I'm gone, carried forward by young people who understand that love should enhance life rather than exhaust it. As I finish writing this, conclusion, it's November again, 3 years since that transformative Thanksgiving that changed everything. Tomorrow, I'll attend Sarah's annual family gathering, but this time as a cherished guest rather than unpaid staff. I'll bring a small appetizer that I enjoy making, not because it's expected, but because I want to contribute something special to our shared meal. The difference is profound. The difference between obligation and choice, between exploitation and reciprocity, between performing love and actually experiencing it. My story began with a moment of recognition, the realization that I deserved better than what I was accepting. It continued with the courage to speak truth about uncomfortable realities, and it culminated in the discovery that authenticity, even when difficult, creates deeper connections than performance ever could. To anyone reading this who sees themselves in my story, who recognizes patterns of exploitation in their own families, who feels exhausted by relationships that drain more than they nourish, I want you to know this: change is possible. Boundaries are not selfish. Your needs matter. Your time and energy are valuable. You deserve to be loved for who you are, not just what you can do for others. And most importantly, it's never too late to teach people how to treat you better. The last Thanksgiving I spent as the family's unpaid caterer was indeed my last, but it was also my first step toward something much more valuable. A life where love feels like love, where family means mutual support, and where being needed is balanced by being valued. That, it turns out, is the best recipe of all. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.